I won't let him die out there. Micah plunged into the snowstorm, his boots sinking deep into the frozen mud. A child was crying somewhere in the forest. Nobody knew who it was. He brought the boy home, kept him warm through the night. The next morning the bank foreclosed on his farm. He lost everything. And then as dawn broke over the horizon, 6 military jeeps surrounded his barn, their engines cutting through the morning silence. Type 8 if you believe kindness is never wasted. Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Micah Barrett, 44, was a wheat farmer in rural Montana. Widowed 3 years earlier, he raised his 10-year-old son Caleb alone on land that had belonged to his family for generations. This winter had been merciless. First came the early frost that killed half his crop, then equipment breakdowns drained what little savings remained. The bank had sent their third warning letter. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 14 days. On that bitter cold afternoon, Micah was repairing fences when he spotted movement at the forest edge. A small figure stumbled between the trees, barely visible through the falling snow. Drawing closer, Micah discovered a boy no older than 7, wandering alone. His clothes were torn, his face smudged with dirt and tears. When asked his name, the child only stared back with frightened eyes. "You're freezing," Micah said, removing his coat to wrap around the boy's shoulders. "Let's get you somewhere warm." The child didn't resist as Micah carried him back to the farmhouse. Inside, he stoked the wood stove, prepared hot soup and set up a makeshift bed beside Caleb's. The boys sized each other up cautiously, before Caleb offered his spare pajamas and a treasured stuffed bear. "We'll find your folks tomorrow," Micah promised as the child drifted to sleep, exhaustion finally winning over fear. At first light, Micah called the sheriff's office. Deputy Alvarez arrived 2 hours later, eyeing the situation with immediate suspicion. "You found him yesterday evening but only called us now." The deputy's pen hovered over his notepad. "Why didn't you report this immediately?" "It was nearly dark, the roads were dangerous, and he was hypothermic," Micah explained. "He needed warmth and food, not a trip through a blizzard." The deputy took photographs of the boy, who still hadn't spoken a word. His radio crackled with a response from dispatch. "No missing children reports matched the description. We'll need to take him in for evaluation," Collins stated flatly, "and I'll need a full statement from you." By afternoon, whispers had already spread through town. "That strange Barrett man has been keeping a child on his property. Always was odd since his wife died. Probably can't take care of his own son, let alone another." The following day, a bank representative arrived, accompanied by the sheriff. "Mr. Barrett, in light of recent events, and after reviewing your loan status, we're accelerating the foreclosure process. Your presence here poses potential community concerns." "Community concerns?" Micah's voice rose. "I saved a child who would have frozen to death." "That's for the authorities to determine," the banker replied coldly. "You have 72 hours to vacate." Micah stood in his yard watching as the boy was driven away in a county vehicle. No one asked why he'd taken the child in. They only saw a struggling farmer who lived too far from town, who kept to himself too much. A convenient suspect. Caleb tugged at his father's hand. "Dad, why are they mad at you for helping?" Micah had no answer. "If you believe a good person deserves to be remembered, stay here with us." The town of Millwood treated Micah like a criminal before any charges were filed. The hardware store owner claimed to be out of the supplies Micah needed. The diner suddenly had no tables available when he and Caleb came for lunch. Even the school principal suggested Caleb might benefit from a few days at home until the situation was clarified. A neighbor who had borrowed Micah's tractor last harvest now crossed the street to avoid him. "Frank," Micah called out, "you know me, I've lived here all my life. I just did what anyone would do." Frank stared at his boots. "Maybe you should have just called it in, Micah. Left it to the professionals. And let a child freeze while waiting for professionals to drive 40 minutes in a blizzard." The neighbor walked away without answering. The boy, identified only as Micah in the papers, had been placed in Horizon Children's Center 2 counties over. No family came forward to claim him. He remained silent, communicating only through nods or headshakes. A week later, the center reported Micah missing from his room. The headline in the Millwood Gazette read, "Child previously held at suspicious farm, now missing again." The insinuation was unmistakable. Micah was called in for further questioning. He sat in the sheriff's office, hands folded calmly despite the anger burning inside. "I found a child alone in freezing conditions, and brought him to safety," Micah stated for what felt like the 100th time. "I fed him, kept him warm, and contacted authorities at the first safe opportunity. That's all that happened." "Then why would he run away from proper care?" the detective asked. "Maybe because he was scared. Because strangers took him from the only place he'd felt safe since whatever happened to him in those woods." His words fell on deaf ears. They saw only what they expected to see, a financially desperate man clinging to land he could no longer afford. That night, with just one day remaining before eviction, Micah and Caleb slept in the barn. The house was already packed, the electricity disconnected. They huddled together under wool blankets, the lingering warmth from the livestock their only comfort. "Dad," Caleb whispered, "will we ever come back home?" Micah stroked his son's hair, unable to lie. "I don't know, buddy. It's not fair. You helped that boy. You always told me helping is the right thing." "It is, Caleb, always, even when it cost you, even if it cost us our farm." Micah swallowed hard. Even then, before dawn, Micah heard a sound outside, footsteps crunching through frosted grass, then retreating quickly. When he carefully opened the barn door, he found an envelope resting on the ground. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for saving my nephew's life. We cannot come forward yet, but know you are not alone. Help is coming." It was unsigned, the handwriting precise but Micah read it twice, then tucked it into his pocket. A cruel prank, a genuine message? He couldn't be sure, but something about the deliberate penmanship gave him pause. Later that morning, as he loaded the last of their possessions into his pickup truck, Micah noticed how the neighbors watched from behind curtains, not with hatred, but with something that looked surprisingly like shame. None had offered help, none had spoken in his defense. The community where his family had farmed for 3 generations had abandoned him at the first whisper of impropriety. As Caleb climbed into the truck, clutching his backpack of treasured belongings, Micah took one last look at the farm, the fields where he taught his son to ride a bicycle, the apple tree his wife had planted, the soil that held his family's footprints across decades. "Time to go, son," he said quietly. "Have you ever been misunderstood for doing the right thing? Type unfair if you have." The first hint of dawn was breaking when Micah heard engines approaching. Not ordinary cars but the distinctive rumble of military-grade vehicles. He stepped outside the barn where they'd spent their final night to see dust clouds rising on the access road. 6 camouflage-painted jeeps roared through his gate, forming a precise semicircle around the barnyard. Each vehicle bore insignia Micah didn't recognize. Not standard army or National Guard. Neighbors emerged from their homes, watching from a distance. Someone must have called the sheriff, who arrived moments later, looking as confused as everyone else. Micah stood protectively in front of the barn door, where Caleb still slept, his hands raised slightly, uncertain if he was about to be arrested or worse. The lead vehicle's door opened, and a man in tactical gear stepped out. No visible rank, but his bearing screamed authority. He approached Micah directly, ignoring the gathering crowd. "Mr. Barrett, I'm Commander Larkin. We're here to secure your safety." Before Micah could process this unexpected statement, another door opened. A small figure jumped down. Micah, the boy he'd rescued. Following behind came a tall man in civilian clothes, his watchful eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. "I don't understand," Micah said. Commander Larkin lowered his voice. "The child you found is Micah Wells. His father is Special Agent Damon Wells, one of our most valuable undercover operatives working against an international weapons trafficking network." The civilian man, presumably Agent Wells, approached, keeping his son close. 3 weeks ago, our safe house was compromised," he explained. "During extraction, we were separated. I believed Micah had been." He stopped, emotion briefly cracking his professional demeanor. "Until your actions confirmed he was alive." "Why didn't you come forward then?" Micah asked. "The operation remains active. Exposure would endanger dozens of lives and years of infiltration work. We had to maintain distance while establishing security protocols." Commander Larkin continued. "Your intervention saved this boy's life. However, the attention you received put you in danger too. The same people hunting Agent Wells would eliminate anyone who might have information, so you let me lose everything instead." Micah couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "No," Thornton said firmly. "We've been monitoring, preparing. What you've endured, the suspicion, the isolation, was the price of kindness in a world that rarely recognizes it. But we don't leave our own behind, or those who protect them." Hayes gestured toward the assembled soldiers, now establishing a perimeter around the farm. "As of 0600 hours this morning, this property has been designated a temporary safehouse under military protection. The foreclosure has been suspended pending national security review." A female officer approached with documents bearing government seal. "Your financial situation has been addressed through a confidential compensation package for services rendered to national security." Micah stood speechless, as Caleb emerged from the barn, eyes wide at the military presence. Micah broke free from his father and ran to the boy, the first genuine smile crossing his face since his rescue. Sheriff Monroe pushed through demanding explanations. Hayes intercepted him smoothly. "Sheriff, this is now a federal matter. We'll be coordinating a press briefing at noon to correct certain mischaracterizations regarding Mr. Barrett's actions. The military established communications equipment in Micah's kitchen. By midday, national news vans gathered at the property edge. A carefully crafted statement announced that Micah Barrett had unwittingly provided critical assistance to an ongoing federal operation, displaying exceptional citizenship in the face of personal sacrifice. Overnight, the narrative transformed. Television stations broadcast footage from Micah's security camera, showing him carrying the half-frozen child through the blizzard to safety. The same neighbors who had shunned him now claim they never believed the accusation. That evening, as military personnel secured the perimeter, Agent Wells found Micah sitting alone on his porch. "My son hasn't spoken since the attack," Thornton said quietly. "The trauma, but he spoke this morning. Do you know what his first words were? Is the farmer sick?" Micah looked toward the barn, where the two boys were helping soldiers feed the remaining livestock. He remembered how you carried him through the snow, how you let him sleep by the fire, how you gave him your son's clothes and didn't ask questions when he couldn't speak. Thornton's voice roughened. "That's why I couldn't let them take your farm. Some debts can't be measured." As darkness fell, the townspeople began arriving one by one. They left flowers at the gate, handwritten notes of apology. They stood awkwardly, shame evident in their postures, until the military escorted them away. Micah approached Micah and took his hand. "You saved me," he said, the words careful and deliberate, as if remembering how to use his voice. "Dad says you're a hero." Micah knelt to the boy's level. "I'm just a farmer who did what needed doing. Anyone would have, but they didn't," Micah replied with a child's simple wisdom. "You did. Have you ever made the right choice when everyone else walked away? Your story matters too." 1 month later, Micah's farm had transformed. The military presence had scaled back to occasional patrols, but their brief occupation had left improvements everywhere. Repaired equipment, a reinforced barn, new irrigation system. The bank loan had been satisfied through an agricultural development grant that everyone understood was government compensation. Micah hadn't become wealthy. His life remained centered around the rhythms of planting and harvest, dawn chores and evening rest. But each morning, he rode out to check the fields with his son and Micah, whom he now fostered while Agent Wells completed his assignment. The community had changed too. Farmers who had once avoided Micah now invited him to Sunday dinner. The school principal personally apologized for her treatment of Caleb. Even Frank, the neighbor who had crossed the street rather than speak to Micah, showed up one day with his sons to help repair fencing without being asked. A small wooden sign appeared at the farm entrance one morning, anonymously placed where one father chose courage over fear. Micah left it standing. Agent Wells visited whenever security protocols allowed. During one such visit, he found Micah inspecting wheat seedlings in the field that had nearly been lost. "The operation ends next month," Thornton said. "I've requested reassignment to a desk position after. Micah needs stability. He'll miss you when he goes," Micah replied. Thornton studied the horizon thoughtfully. "Actually, I was hoping he could stay here part-time. He's different with you. Healing." We both. Eli had always believed the farm was his legacy, but he never imagined it would become a sanctuary not just for crops, but for lives in need of healing. In choosing compassion over caution, he had not only saved a boy, but reawakened a sense of justice long buried beneath cold protocol and fearful silence. Later that evening, as fireflies rose from the fields and the boys chased them through gathering dusk, Micah sat on his porch steps. The farm that had nearly been taken from him now hummed with renewed purpose. The community that had abandoned him now pointed to him as an example. He didn't feel like anyone special. He had simply refused to walk past suffering when he had the power to help, regardless of the cost. If that made him different, perhaps the problem lay not with him, but with a world that had made compassion seem extraordinary rather than expected. The world might turn its back, but true justice always arrives when we hold fast to what's right until the end. Some people never set out to be heroes, yet their actions make an entire nation grateful. Have you ever been misunderstood for doing the right thing? Share your story, because sometimes kindness needs protection too. Subscribe for more incredible stories, where right stories won't be forgotten, even in silence.